Well, hey there, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to the SPL Waiting Room, your one-stop shop for all thing Smite Pro League. Here in Season 8, as things have been getting interesting, and of course, they're heating up here in Phase number 3. A lot of these teams putting every amount and ounce of themselves into these sets because everything matters going forward. After this round robin stage we're in, we talked about this a little bit last week, we go to that group stage, then we have some playoffs, then we have Worlds. It all feels like it's crumbling around behind us. It is so close to the end, and yet still so far away. And of course, that has us look back. I want to say a little bit on what's been happening this year because we've had a lot of hot streaks from a lot of these teams. And of course, that also has us looking forward to some of these sets because some of these teams are still on their hot streak. So I'm going to go ahead and do the grand scheme of things, just throw this out there. The longest loss streak we've ever seen was a 25-set loss streak from SK Gaming. The longest this year is 13 from the Valkyries. The longest sets in a row for wins is 10, held by NRG. They actually had a split way back when. They had one single game loss. Unfortunately for them, it happened right in the middle, and that's where we get to some interesting things. So far this year, we've had a couple of teams put up their limit. We've seen the Leviathans specifically hit a 7-set streak in a row. This was ended by the Titans there in the Phase 2 playoffs, and so they've managed to get close, but not quite close enough. Of course, you go back a little further beyond that, and we look at the Olympus Bolts, who, as everyone could remember, had a ridiculously long undefeated streak at the very beginning of Phase 2. They get 8 sets in a row, and of course, that has now been tied by the Tartarus Titans, who are currently sitting at 8-set streaks in a row. Their last loss was a 0-2 loss to the Leviathans in Phase 2, Week 7, and since then, they have not lost any of their sets, of course, including the playoffs. That now gets them to the point where things are going to get interesting because they only play the Kings this week, so they have a very difficult team to try and jump the hurdle to get to not only the longest streak this year, but potentially try and tie and maybe even surpass NRG from years past. Of course, now we're going to take a nice little peek and look-see at what happened here in week number 1, a recap created by Blues Ultra, that is BLUES ULTRA. That is on Reddit, Instagram, and Twitter, and I highly recommend following them. They also have a fantastic spreadsheet that I use for a lot of the trivia questions that we do on Mondays during the media days, and you can see it. The thing that stands out to me the most on that is Paul had the most ridiculous KDA, a 16 KDA, and they only played 5 games, and, admittedly, that's a lot of games to play, actually, considering some of these teams only got to play 2. And so that is an incredible feat for him, very well undying. He also has the most first bloods after week number 1. So the Titans are looking pretty good, I guess is the best way to describe it. Again, thanks to Blues Ultra. Go ahead and follow them everywhere. And, of course, you can follow them on the SMITEPro subreddit, where I also see those get posted all the time, and then you can start up your own discussions. It's another fun little plug that we can have. But I'm not alone on the show today. We're going to be talking about a lot of fun stuff. So I've got JMAC and I've got Myflin sitting alongside me. Myflin, I'm excited to have you here because you play a lot of jungle.
I do.
And
Too much.
We are going into 8.9, which a lot of people have kind of been re-hyping as this jungle patch.
Yeah, I've got some very in-depth thoughts about how this is going to affect the actual jungle meta. I'm not sure if you want me to just jump into it right now. We can say that for a little bit later, but there is some wide sweeping changes, I'd say. But maybe at the end of the day, and I'm sure some fans at home don't want to hear this, we're going to see a lot of that same meta that we've been watching since 8.8.
I didn't want to hear that. I wanted you to be like, hey, we're about to get 30 different assassins being played. I don't even remember. I'm not sure there's 30 assassins in the game. But
no, we're not mages, bro. We're not mid lane.
No,
we're not that
the mages.
Not that fortunate.
Well, I know a lot of the big changes have been to the ones that stood out to me the most. Like the Mace Tree got a bunch of buffs to it as well, and I've seen a lot of I want to say murmuring on Twitter. I don't know if that's the right word for it, of people looking into it, and it feels like JMAC, this is going to be an interesting one because so far the jungle meta this year, we've seen a lot of Osiris, we've seen a lot of warriors, and there's still some players that benefits, like Twig, a big setup player. It's definitely been beneficial for them, but then players like Sam for Soccer on the other side, people who used to play assassins all the time and were kind of hard carries, hyper carries, haven't necessarily been able to find so much. Do you think this patch is going to help revitalize at least those players?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are a few junglers in particular, Sam, as you highlighted, even Panatom, Captain Twig. Those are players who are really going to benefit from this assassin patch. And I think it was funny, even talking to Captain Twig when he was back here over on Monday, he He was saying he actually kind of enjoyed the current meta that we were just previously in a little bit, like playing some of those gods. But coming back to this assassin, we might get to see more of the Naja that he used to like to play. I mean, Transcendence and Jotun's Wrath, and then a Hydra's Lament to boot. I mean, you get 40% CDR and a ton of power to boot with it now that you get those extra changes. Sam Soccer, who was probably one of the tried and true assassin players in the SPL, and a lot of his gods even got kind of indirect buffs because of all these items, and then one god in particular, a Wheelish, a direct buff for her base damage. I think we could be seeing some kind of nutty play coming out of Sam, and even Panatom has some good surges in there, even with that Susano that we saw previously. Scream will be getting a couple of extra buffs as well.
And it's interesting, you could see them as we ran them across the bottom of the screen, but like, your Brawler's Beat Stick got a 10 power buff, something that seems small, but in the grand scheme of things, we've had a lot of healers. That feels like it's nice since everyone's having to buy the item anyway. We've seen Jotun's Wrath with the decrease in its cost as well as an increase in power there for Crusher. But the one I caught my eye, Myflin, and I'm wondering if it makes a big enough change, is this Heartseeker change where you're getting a little bit more scaling and damage. It feels like it could be impactful, but at the same time, it's not an item we've seen a whole lot. And admittedly, I think I've seen it more on Wukong this year than I've seen it on junglers.
Yeah, so Heartseeker is in an interesting spot right now in that this most recent change in 8.9 is kind of a reversion of what we've seen in the past. They've kind of reverted that scaling back to up to 6% when you've got 400 physical power, which is very late game. So I think that this Heartseeker change is almost kind of reflective of the jungle meta holistically. With Mannequin Scepter, as strong as it is right now, that means that the Osiris's and the Erlang Shens are still going to be, for my money, the top of the crop. You've got damage mitigation from Osiris or a health shield from Erlang Shen that can keep you involved in these team fights for a very long time, and then you're relying on Mannequin Scepter as your core of DPS. Heartseeker, on the other hand, kind of says, all right, but there's another style of jungle that is available, and I like to call it the tactical nuke jungler, when you're going Hidden Blade plus Heartseeker, and you're willing to trade your life for any individual member and then find as much damage as you can afterward. I'm talking that Nike style where you blink in, you press ult, and you just deal as much damage as possible. Or the Ratataskers, where you ult in, and you just deal as much damage as possible, hopefully take out one of these hyper carries. But I think that, as far as I'm concerned, the early game is still going to be dominated by these warriors, these cleave auto-attack junglers that can utilize mannequins.
Yeah, it's been oppressive in the games where they've been able to get ahead, and of course in some of these games, like Osiris is I'm on the fence. I'm keeping my eye on you because sometimes he comes in and he is the absolute menace and nobody can stand up to him, and then sometimes it's just like, man, why'd you pick that? Oh, man. We'll have to see how this week goes. Of course, I'm excited for, I think, the in-studio matchup, although again, the Scarabs Kings one, I think the jungle matchup is going to be very interesting just to see what we have there. A lot of fun ones that are going to be happening over the weekend. And one that catches my eye, Myflin, it's going to be coming right back to you because JMAC had mentioned it earlier, but a Wheelish got a buff. And this feels like something that is going to be impactful because we already had some of these junglers picking a Wheelish, Sam most notably, but like she was already kind of there. Is she actually going to come back now that she's been bumped up?
I think that a Wheelish is a god that is going to kind of come and go with rosters, right? There are a couple of players within the league that are very comfortable on this god. Layers comes to mind as a guy who really likes going towards this pick, and occasionally it just fits your draft very well, or occasionally you're trying to counter something like an Odin, which is a very meta pick, and now Wheelish has a decent counter matchup into him. Could be one way in. I think that as far as new gods go that are going to be coming into the meta, it's generally, is Osiris banned? Is Erlang Shen banned? All right, now assassins are generally a little bit better.
Then we can jump into it.
We can start going towards these assassins a little bit more so. Hun Bots comes to mind. Jotun's Wrath having a buff is very big for him. Transcendence as well, getting a power increase in the early game, also incredibly strong. And I know I'm kind of sounding doom and gloom a little bit for assassins inside the jungle. I will say, at level 20, if these games are expected to go late, if the meta shifted in such a way that we can expect late game team fights to be 20 versus 20 as far as levels are concerned, assassins are much better than their contemporaries. The Warriors, the Erlang Shens, the Osirises, they're going to fall off much harder in the late game, but that early game dominance and how the meta has lined up for the last couple of months being so heavily emphasized towards the early game is my only holdout, my only concern.
We'll get to watch it, I'm sure, like this week. It's usually like you get 1 week where it's like this fused meta where some people are trying some new things, some people are still sticking with the tried and true from the last few patches. And then next week, I think, is when we'll like finally have it hammered home. Okay, these are the gods, these are the picks and everything. And another one that caught my eye with this patch, JMAC, it's Iset. She got again, it feels like a very small buff, and I'm trying to think of the last time someone played her in earnest, but one of those gods that, you go back a few years, this is a must-ban, must-have, and it feels like she's hovering around the same area she had, at least in terms of skills, back then.
Yeah, I mean, Isette's kind of in that weird spot. Right now we're in this still somewhat healer-centric meta. Hell and RDO kind of being the two big ones, Umoja in there. And so you need a god who can apply Divine Ruin really well. Isette can do it, but she's not the best to. You also have to walk up very close to the wave in order to be able to clear it. There's a lot of late-game damage she can have with Spirit Ball. The crowd control, the silence that can come through as well is so powerful for her. And that Circle of Protection is kind of the big name for her kit, and that's what got the buff. It got a 5% buff to the damage mitigation. Well,
like mitigation.
How good is 5% mitigation? Well, 5% is better than 0, so now you have 25%. That's always nice to have, but the big problem is always finding a good place to really drop that ultimate. That's really what separates the good E-sets from the great E-set players, is where are you dropping that Circle of Protection? Are you dropping it right when the fight starts? Or are you more often than not, what we've been seeing so much with this god is just an objective secure, but even then we've been seeing some players who aren't able to get those objective secures with the god, and if you're not able to get those secures, you're kind of falling back on, why we're even picking the E-set here if that's the main kind of, I'm not going to say it's the only gimmick with this god, but it's one of the main ones, is that this ability scales almost harder than any other single mage ultimate in an instance burst of damage. You have gods like Anubis that can shred through a Fire Giant, shred through a Gold Fury really quickly, but none of them can really slam 2,000-3,000 damage in an instant on those objectives like Isette can. This 5% mitigation will help. It'll make her team fighting a little bit stronger. It'll make everybody who gets to stand inside that circle just a little bit stronger. But I'm not sure how much that's actually going to bump her up as far as priority for the mid laners.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. It's weird to think about it, but I'm pretty sure most of the E-set that I've seen in the last year has been Sino playing it in the jungle.
Yeah.
And none of the mid laners. We did get to see some of that came through. Also, I just to make sure I had the notes properly, I opened up our SMITEgame.com so I could see the full patch notes. It's snowing on the website. I don't know what's up with that. It's snowing on the website. I don't know what to tell you. It's kind of cool, though. Either way, the next god that is going to be moving forward is Horus. Horus is someone that we've seen played specifically by the Leviathans mainly, but a couple of other players have picked him up. I think Jake played him earlier this year as well, and so he's been back and forth. He's got a good amount, but Myflin, he got a couple of little buffs, right? Increased bonus damage from the Gust attack on his updraft, but increased healing on his Protector's Surge, and that's the one that really, I think, helps keep him in that lane.
Yeah, I think Horus is just quality of life changes right here. I mean, sure, the updraft bonus damage is nicer, but at the end of the day, it's only scaling 10 higher than it was capping out at 50, now caps out at 60. And the healing buff isn't necessarily a buff. It's kind of more so, again, quality of life. You're still maxing out at 250 once that ability is fully leveled up. And now, instead of starting at 50 and scaling up to 250, you're starting at 70 and scaling up to 250. And as Horus generally does, max that ability a little bit later on inside of the game. It means that you're probably going to find a little bit more value early on. But I don't think that this change is so much so that you're going to be really saying, okay, well, what's Horus doing? Well, are we banning this god? Are we top picking him? Instead, it's the players that have been playing Horus are going to have a better time playing Horus. I don't think we're going to have players saying, hey, man, look, you don't have a Horus inbound. Let's go ahead and start practicing it. I think it's fine just to let that be a flavor pick for some of these guys.
And it is worth noting all of that healing. I think late game it is the exact same number and things like that as the early game healing, which I will admit, as someone who loves playing Horus, I wanted it. I like that. I like that
good.
so much because I felt like I was not helpful until about level 4, level 5, level 7. Well, I mean, if you get those stuns early, look, he's strip protection. I love Horus. I'm going to go ahead and leave this behind because otherwise I could go on a full tirade. The same way I do about Pillars, not Pillars of Agony. That's Hades' ult. The other one, Dharmic Pillars, being one of my favorite abilities in the game. The last big change, or at least the last one that I was looking at, because again, it's someone who has been played a whole lot lately. Well, not a whole lot, but still picked up. It's this Uller, who is just on the cusp. He's not necessarily like the top tier, everyone's going to him hunter. And he's not really bottom tier either. He's not everybody ignoring him. He's just right there a couple of times. I think we've seen Cyclone play him a few times. Now, that says unplayed in the SPL, so maybe he's just sitting around and hasn't. And I'm absolutely flabbergasted by that. There's no way he's
been watching a lot of SEC.
I feel like Emilitu played him at some point. I feel like I've seen a few of the Hunter players pick him up just like once or twice.
Unplayed so far this phase, I believe, in the SPL.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And
that makes sense.
I will say the only Hunter unplayed so far this year is Charybdis, and because there's only 5 gods that have been unplayed, and I don't think she's legally allowed to be played yet. Maybe that's this week. I can't remember. Either way, JMAC, it feels like some of these buffs might be helpful. You get increased power scaling on the bladed arrow, really good range, really good damage, and you also get increased attack speed and physical lifesteal from his passive there in the axe stance.
Yeah, one of the things with Ullr that he's an ability hunter that came in here in the middle of a bow build meta, and that's kind of why we didn't see him very often in phase number 2. Now that we're seeing a buff to what you can pretty much call the essential core of Ullr's entire kit. You get Transcendence, you can get things like Heartseeker, you can even go any of those mace items, and he's going to feel really good, and he's going to really chunk through some of these gods. But I think an important thing to pop through here is one thing that Shinto highlighted, that maybe we even see this maybe kind of creep over into the mid lane.
Yeah, I think that the additional scaling will help itself out for that. I mean, if you want to go towards Transcendence early on, again, Transcendence eating a buff, getting additional power in its own right, you stack it up, that mana stack plus the additional scaling on Bladed Arrow going to feel very good. But I think it's actually the passive buff that is really going to affect Ullr. You're scaling up to 30% additional lifesteal and axe stance. Amazing. Great stat stick all the time. But even more important, now you're going up to 30% additional attack speed all the time with Ullr once you've got that ability maxed out. That is constant. It's not like you're popping your 2. You're not Artemis. You don't need the Vengeful Assault. Instead, it is consistently going to be you've always got 30% more attack speed baked into your kit. That's pretty good, and it fits into the bow build very nicely.
That's one of those things. Look, I remember when Ullr, and you might remember this. You should probably remember this too. When Ullr came out, and your axes were insta stuns, things like that.
Oh, yeah, that was
this is it's not necessarily reminiscent of that. That was busted, and nobody wants that. But this feels like a good shift to kind of push him forward, at least into the meta. Of course, things to keep your eyes on as we move forward throughout this week. Only a few players have been picking him up, and maybe he will jump up into their hands a little bit more often, or maybe everybody is going to start scooping him up. We'll have to keep our eyes open for that one. Instead, now we are going to be moving forward to Factseek Gaming. Now, I want you to know, I wrote these almost immediately after we had the meeting for this show, and I sat down and immediately thought, oh no, did I ever write the questions? Good news is I did, and that we do have them.
That's great.
And I think one of them got, little tiny spoilies. We mentioned it earlier today. We'll see how much they were paying attention. And so I'll turn over to JMAC and Myflin. You can play it in chat as well. You can slam the answers if you know it. I unfortunately don't have you open. I guess I could. I have the internet. Either way, first question, who had the highest KDA in week number 1?
That was Paul.
Yeah.
16 KDA, only died 2 times in his 5 games. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah. All right. You didn't have to blow up my spot, man. It's just yes.
It's
just
yes.
Paul.
He said Paul, and you went, yeah. And that is the answer. Yeah, it's Paul. We talked about that a little bit earlier. It was a 15.8 exactly that he was able to scoop up, but of course rounding, that goes up to 16. He was insane. He played 5 games. He was in the 2 teams that played the most games, and yet still managed to not die. In fact, had some really, really insane turnaround moments that made things different. Now, this one was a question I had trouble wording for a while, but how many teams' top players had a smaller KDA than Panatom? So Panatom had a 4.9 KDA, and now of all the teams, I always separate it and I look at the players with the highest KDA per team. So how many teams had a player with the top KDA that was lower than 4.9, which was Panatom's?
All the way up until now, correct?
This is just last week.
Oh, just last week.
Yeah, this is only phase 3.
So definitely the Valkyries.
How many teams' top player had a smaller KDA?
So that was a little under the breath, but I could feel
at least one.
At least one.
I'll wait for him to answer first. It seems like good tech just generally, but
I'm trying to think because Final K was on the top, Shinto was up there.
I was thinking too much.
Paul was up there, so there's 3 immediately at the top. I'm gonna probably just say 2.
You're gonna say 2.
Your price is right at me.
Price is right in you.
Well, the good news is you're closer, and without going over, 5 teams were below his.
Wow.
So the Warriors, the Scarabs, the Kings, the Bolts, and the Valkyries all had KDAs.
I just assumed the Bolts
that
were
were higher.
Literally everybody except the 3 who were shown.
The highest for the Valkyries was Johnny with a 1.1. The highest for the Bolts was Haddix with a 3.8.
close.
Obviously, the Titans had a 16, so that doesn't count.
Doing pretty
They're
good.
out of there. Kings, their highest was a 1.3. Scarabs' highest was a 4.5. The Dragons' highest was an 11.5. And then the highest for the Warriors was a 3.1 there for Nika. And so a lot of those teams being just under where Panatom was, but also just I like showcasing those because I think it's nuts when the Leviathans do that well. What is the third question? I have it up over here. There's one god last week who had a 100% ban rate.
What?
Who was it?
100% ban rate.
Yep, she was banned in every single game. And I
Okay,
just
so
gave it
there's
on-
our hint. It's a female
Did
god.
Hell get through? I'm not sure that she did.
I don't think that Hell got through, but I want to say RTO in this case because I don't think we saw a single RTO last week either. And I know Yamoja got picked, and it's got to be between Hell or RTO.
I'll take RDO. Got it. I said it first. Locked in.
Okay, so if you're saying RTO, then I'm gonna go Hell.
You're going to go Hell? Well, Hell had 11 out of 14 games, but
Dang.
RDO was banned all 14 games that
Dang,
were
Myflin,
played.
you're so good at this, man.
And
Undefeated,
yeah,
really.
she was
It's wild.
the only one. I mean, Khepri was banned 10 games. It kind of kept things interesting, but yeah, she was banned 100%.
Khepri had 10
Erlong, Shin, and Cerberus were tied at 10 picks. There's another one that I'm just going to throw out. Here's a bonus fact. I don't know what the question is, so we're going to go ahead and look at it. On average, which tower is destroyed the earliest? It is I'm going to say my answer first because I haven't got to answer one.
It's got to be a tier 2, right?
It is the right side solo lane, tier
Well,
1.
Hold on, does it specify which side of the map's one is destroyed, or is it just which?
And all of SBL, total, ever.
Is
Okay.
it? Are you asking order or chaos production, or are we just asking which tower?
Like, is it okay? So
Order or chaos.
Okay, so it's order or chaos. Which tower?
I'm still saying right-hand solo tier 1.
chaos tier 1.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with chaos solo.
Mid.
Order.
I'm going with
Mine's order.
I'm going with chaos solo tier 1. I feel like order is usually the most winning side in the SPL. if I'm
Oh,
not
well, we're all
mistaken.
wrong.
So
It is
well,
the chaos.
I was closest.
Oh, no, sorry. Let's watch
maybe
this.
not. Okay, so it's
Oh,
2106.
okay, it's backwards. Okay,
Okay, so we're going
okay.
by time.
Oh,
Usually,
no.
chaos mid in 1958.
Damn, wait, hold on,
1956,
pause. How long were some of these damn games that these... Look at these.
1905.
And let's go, baby!
10 seconds
The
of
victory!
Why is the order
10
side
seconds.
solo? Who's playing order side and costing solo?
Yeah, dude,
bro?
dude,
If
they're
solo
too busy-
tier 1's going down, you're getting bodied. Okay.
All right, look, I just want to throw it out there. You said Chaos mid tower,
Yep.
Myflin. That was third to last, so that was fourth on the
Thanks.
list.
Fourth.
You said Chaos solo tower. You were
So
second.
second.
I said order
First.
side solo tower, so I'm
By
right.
10
yay me.
seconds on average.
Man, you're the stats guy. You've
Yeah,
been doing it
look,
longer, bro. It's not fair.
I only get one question a week, okay? I've got to take these.
yeah,
when
I've
I
got
can.
to study for like 6 questions.
I do kind of give you a test, huh? I
That's
sit
actually
down.
cool that's actually really cool having the graphic there.
That was actually, yeah, I loved that. I want more of those, but maybe that's a big ask. Either way, we can move forward to week number 2 and see what is going to be happening this week. Of course, you've seen some of the schedule. And here is a look at the standings. Leviathans, Titans, both 2-0 up at the top. Warriors and Valkyries still looking for their first. Actually, and the Scarabs and the Kings all still looking for their first win so far. Kings are going up against the Scarabs. Somebody is going to be finding that one. And of course, we're going to be looking at two undefeated teams a little bit later. The Bolts and the Dragons taking each other on. I had made a tweet about this, but right now the Bolts have this year's specific head-to-head matchup versus the Dragons. The only set they've lost was admittedly maybe the most important one they've played against them, which was the Phase 1 playoffs finals. But they're going to be playing a little bit later in the studio, and it's not the only in-studio matchup that the Dragons have this week. They've got 2 of them, one today against the Bolts, one against Leviathans. Myflin, this is a very, very heavy-handed week for the Dragons to try and do well.
Yeah, I think that the Dragons have just got themselves a stacked lineup, right? I mean, which team are you going to prepare for more? Generally, when you've got a doubleheader, at least in my experience, but I've never been in a top-seeded position like the Jade Dragons. I've kind of always been the challenger. You kind of practice more so for one. You say, okay, I'm not winning the majority, so I'm going to go ahead and focus on this one set, at least try and put all my effort there. The Jade Dragons do not have that luxury considering how highly seeded they are. They need to win both of these, or at least I'm sure they would very much like to. Look, man, this is it's a tough cut for this week, but if any team's capable of doing it, I have faith in the Jade Dragons.
And it is something, I think that was one of our bonus facts last week, or one of the facts and gaming questions last week, was the Jade Dragons have played the most games of any team. I think right now, they're tied with the Leviathans for 80 games. I'd have to double check it. I know they're at 80 games, and there's another team that is tied up for them. So they are up there in terms of what they've been able to do. They've been playing a whole ton. They typically go 3 games, but this is a very important one because we look at jungle matchups, right? Panatom has been doing incredibly well. Lasbra has been, he was really hot at the start for 3/4 of the year so far, and then the last 4, well, not even, maybe last 1/8, he's been just slightly less hot overall, not necessarily hitting the exact same stride, but still doing incredibly well. So JMAC, this means Sam has a very important week ahead of him, especially jumping into studios. This is going to be the first time for the Dragons playing in the studio this year. But with these jungle patches, it feels like this could be a good week for him.
Yeah, this could be a big one for Sam, and I think with the change-ups to the jungle, this could even really kind of change up his god pool a little bit, and maybe we do see a little bit of a divergence away from the standard that we've been seeing, the Gilgameshes, the Osiris, Zero Long Chens, but I think as Myflin alluded to, we might still see a little bit more of that, and Sam's been able to adapt to really both of these metas just fine, whether it be the Assassin meta, whether it be the Warrior, the Warrior jungle meta through here. Sanfrecaucker has always been kind of one of those key players. He's been a huge part of this mid lane 2v2, trying to get some of those first bloods and really allow Hurrywin to kind of try and press some of that lead in the mid lane.
And you have to remember that each of these teams are only going to be playing each other once. And so every single set at this point, at least for the round robin stage, matters a lot because it affects your group stage, and then that affects your playoffs, and then that affects your worlds. And so everything is tumbling into each other. Myflin, do you think that today, specifically up against the Bolts, Sam is going to have a nice resurgence into the jungle?
I think that Sanfrecaucker has done everything within his power to avoid playing Osiris and Erlang Shen. I mean, even in the 8.8 mastery, where Erlang Shen and Osiris were the absolute kings of the jungle, it's only in the last couple of weeks where Sanfrecaucker relented and said, okay, I guess I'm going to start playing those gods. Now that standard assassins have gotten a pretty sizable buff, I would be surprised if Sanfrecaucker decides to play either Erlang or Osiris. So is this patch going to help him, as this little lower third is asking? I'd say yes, but I don't think he needs the help. Just play the Osirises, man.
We'll see, I guess, how that ends up shaking down. I know the Bolts have had a lot of favor for that Osiris lately, so if it is something that is still going to be held true, then we'll anticipate seeing that. That's going to be a little bit later today. They will be in the studio. In fact, I can see that, well, if the door was open, I could see exactly where they would be playing from here, and so it will be a very, very fun one. No, I can't. There's also a camera technically sitting right there that is blocking my path. But it is going to be a good one. We're going to be watching, of course, right before that, the Scarabs and the Kings, and that is the very first matchup, and that is a good way to segue into the predictions for this week and see what we have said. I know me and JMAC were talking about this earlier, and it seems like we aren't the only ones who had looked at this. We have Myflin alongside us. All three of us voted for the Scarabs over the Kings.
I did not put that Valkyries one. I voted for the Bolts. Nope. I'm just saying that now.
Nope, you put Valkyries.
There is no way. I legitimately lost. Okay, so I'm being told by production I did lock that in on the thing. I'm gonna put out there that I did vote for the Bolts mentally, but I may have misclicked because clicking buttons is hard.
Error,
man, what's wild? Man. Yeah,
clicking buttons is hard, man. Look.
At the end of the day, what's there is there, JMAC, and so your percentage, I don't know if we're keeping track of percentage, but if we are, then your percentage is going to go down. A lot of people saying, so Hindu said Warriors over the Scarabs. He also said Dragons. I feel like Hindu, there's a couple of these that feel like he just wanted to be contrarian for some of them. I'm excited to see how these are going to shake out. JMAC, you also said the Bolts over the Dragons. I'm actually surprised to see as many of us voting for the Dragons today.
I think I might also be standing alone because I think even on APAM show that aired earlier, I also was the only one who thought that the Bolts are going to come out on top of this match.
That's wild. I don't remember voting for that.
I thought we discussed
I did it yesterday.
Maybe everybody's just trolling at this point.
Oh, no, I'm not trolling. I agree 100% with what's in there,
Yeah, my votes are sick.
Look, I don't know. Maybe I did just click the Valkyries. You know what? I'm going to go out there and say Valkyries are going to come out with a playing? They're going to destroy the Bolts.
I'm pretty sure you're casting that one, right?
I think I am, actually.
All right, cool. Keep that energy.
I'm going to keep that there. We're going to keep that.
Hey, I've got to give them the credit that's due. The Valkyries looked a lot better last week. I would argue that their last week games of play looked better than most of the rest of their year. So I would say that if they're going to do it, now's the time to do it. And, of course, now is the time where it matters. SPL week number 2 is going to be coming up next. So go grab your popcorn if you have it, some drinks, some snacks, what have you. We'll be right back with the SMITEPro League.